One of the most misunderstood questions in non-dual spirituality is the question that grounds the practice of self-inquiry, namely the question, who am I? And there are a lot of misconceptions about what this question means, some of which I want to go over today. Who am I is often very confusing to people in terms of what it's actually asking them to look for. And so I want to make a few points. One is the question can be viewed in many different contexts, right? In different contexts, language means different things. So, if, for example, a biologist was looking at the question, who am I? Um, they would be looking at it in biological terms. And they would be trying to operationalize that question in some kind of biological framework. Like, oh, the eye is some kind of function of the brain, it involves these physiological pieces. If you ask you know someone who they are, certain parts of the brain light up, etc., perhaps, right? If you ask the same question of a I don't know, like a sociologist or something like that, they might view it in social terms, right? Oh, the eye is socially constructed by one's community and one's upbringing in certain ways, one's culture. In Vedanta or non dual spirituality, the question, who am I, is used in a very specific context. It's a very specific game we're playing. It's not to deny the fact that the question can be viewed in many, many other contexts, but there's only one specific way in which we are dealing with this question. And that specific way is to realize that we are looking for something which is fundamentally in our experience. In our experience. It is not a question that deals with something abstract, but is something that is, in a way, as concrete as the sight of a rose, the sound of a rock dropping into a pond. In some ways, those may not be so concrete, they are relatively concrete for our purposes. Who am I is referring to is the fact that in any experience you have, whether it be a sight, sound, touch, smell, or feel, or taste, whether it be a thought or an emotion, something you imagine or something you recollect, there are kind of two facets or aspects of the experience. One facet or aspect is the object, the thing that you're experiencing as apart from yourself, right? So the visual image, let's say, of the rose, and maybe its scent or its feel, or a particular thought you're having. That's the object part. But the other facet or aspect of that experience, in your experience, in your own subjective, inner movie kind of experience, is the knowledge that you are experiencing this object. Part of the experience is the sense of you being there as witness to the object and as therefore being apart from it. So any experience consists of two components. One component is the object. The other is the sense that I am experiencing or witnessing this object and am not this object. Because if I were this object, then I would not be able to experience it. The experience of the object in our particular context, right? This particular context, which is referring to our direct experience of things, our direct internal, inner movie, subjective experience of things, right? Not biology, not physics, not sociology, not any other academic ways of looking at things, which are all valid in their own contextual ways. But in this specific context, we're examining our own direct experience and noticing that when we experience the object, we also simultaneously experience the subject, which is, I'm aware of this and I'm not this. So I experience this, that's one part of it, and simultaneously with experiencing this perception, imagination, memory, desire, emotion, whatever it is you experience, I also experience the fact of I as the non-object who is the witness to this experience. So, who am I is a question that is meant to stimulate you, not to just ponder in some sort of intellectual, abstract way, well, who could I possibly be? But rather to draw your attention from the object facet of things, where it usually is, towards the subject facet of things. Right? You could view, in fact, every experience as being this kind of combination subject-object thing, a kind of pole on one side the object, on the other side the subject. The subject, when I say the subject, I mean the I. When I say the I, again, I mean that which is the witness, which knows itself to be witnessing, and which knows itself, because it's witnessing, the object not to be the object. We could say awareness too, which I don't love that term as much, just because it's again a little bit more abstracted. The I is what we actually use continuously in our own language to refer to ourselves, and what we're trying to do is really strip away the kind of lazy, habitual notions about ourselves that we've kind of built up and layered over time. So, so this who am I is saying, turn your attention away from the object side of experience and attempt to locate, turn your attention towards this subject side of experience. How is it that this I, which knows, which you feel as concretely, seemingly as concretely as any experience, feel into that, try to capture that, grasp that, locate that, try to attend to that in the same way that you attend to the feeling of anything else, to the experience of anything else. And what happens when you do that is you try to turn towards the subject, and what do you end up with? Well, you usually end up with another object. So you've tried to turn, you know that you're here as the experiencer of things, but when you try to actually turn your gaze back at the witness, it suddenly becomes very elusive. It ends up, you get another object, but then that object, another, as to say, that sort of another experience has its own witness. Again, you have the sense of the I am witnessing that. And again, you chase or hunt the witnessing part of that, the I who is not that object and who knows itself to be experiencing that object. And again, you get another object in the process, right? So this subject suddenly becomes extremely difficult to find. The I, the witnessing I, as you look for it, well, where is it? It's right here. And that's the irony, right? Even in your inability to find it, it's there. You are experiencing your so-called inability to find it. This chasing something in your own experience, that is, you're experiencing in some sense, your own I-ness, your own I am here witnessing not the particular experience at hand, your attempt to turn your inner attentional gaze at that and running after it as it sort of sprints away from you. That is the meaning of the who am I question. Who am I is referring to that quest, that chase, that hunt, which is a hunt within your own feelings, basically, your own experience of the world, your own inner life, basically. It's not something like it's not a question like, well, what is God, or what is the sound of one hand clapping, even, right? It's not something referring to something which is this outside mystery. It is something which is within your own continuous, trying to think of another word other than experience for this, within your own continuous, intimate, incredibly intimate, moment to moment being. As you're experiencing a series of objects, and along with that series of objects, parallel to them is a subject. So what is that subject? What is that subject is another word for who am I, another phrase for who am I, and again, it just means, don't think about what the subject is. It means turn your attention towards that knowledge which is arising. Sometimes I talk about, I say, if I asked you, are you aware of, I don't know, your left ear right now? And you might say yes. And I say, well, where did your mind go to ascertain that information, to find that whether that was true, whether you were aware of your left ear or not? It sort of instantaneously went somewhere. It consulted something. It dipped somewhere. Where it dipped, that's what we're looking for. Now, another clarification I want to make is people sometimes ask, are we looking for the self with a capital S, or Brahman as it would be said in Vedanta? Because, after all, the capital S self, the true self, is not an object. So why would we look for something that's not an object and therefore cannot be found, right? And objects are things that are experienced, right? And so, if something is not an object, then it cannot really be an experience. I mean, which you might immediately then say, well, aren't you asking me to look for the subject? Isn't the subject not an object? Well, this is precisely the point. Precisely the point of the entire inquiry is to recognize that the subject itself is a kind of object. It's a very, very special, magical kind of object. That's called the ego. And that we are not directly looking for the capital S self, which is indeed not an object. And it is also not, it's not exactly the subject in the way that we think of the subject either. That is to say, it's not the I in the way that we understand it to be the I. The I, as we understand the I, is another kind of special object. It's a very, very special class of object called the subject. But that's not the self. We don't look for the self directly. What we do is we look for the, we don't look for the capital S self directly. We look for the small s self directly. That's our sense of I-ness. That's the ego. And when we persist in looking for it, and it is very elusive, at a certain point after that very search diverts our attention away from the other things that would normally bind us, right? Because normally what happens is our attention is diverted by many other distractions, desires, and fears, all based on our identity as, a person, right? But if we hunt the I, then what happens is in the process we basically are doing lots of things. We're questioning essentially the identity that's based on being a person, and we're noting the fact that we don't actually know who we are because we're trying to focus on this I and we're not able to get to it. And then simultaneously, we're also increasing our inner peace, and all of these practices are undermining our usual sense of identity, our usual sense of reliance and desires and fears based on our sort of unexamined assumption of being a person. So in the process of that, our attachments to the outside world weaken, and when they weaken sufficiently, then suddenly there is a perspectival shift. Because the I that we're looking for, this sort of very special kind of object called the subject, is like the entire frame. It's like the entire frame within which normal waking experience seems to happen. We can't force ourselves to be able to suddenly see the entire frame as a frame. That suddenly seeing the entire frame as a frame, that moment of insight, that eureka moment, is not something that can be forced. All we can do is engage in the practice of hunting through our own attention this fact, this moment to moment fact that we are continuously experiencing of the I that is here, that is witnessing any particular experience, and that is not the experience. We're trying to hunt and turn our attention towards that continuously. That's the meaning of the who am I. We do that continuously, we weaken the attachments, and when the attachments are sufficiently weak, then, and only then, at a time of its own choosing, does this eureka moment happen. And what is the content of that eureka moment? The content of that eureka moment is that all along, this I that you thought you were was not defining you, actually. There was something that underlay that mode, and that is more constant and continuous than it. That the I that you think you are, the egoic I, the subject that co-occurs with experience, that I is a kind of illusion, a cognitive illusion based on thought. And that there is another, deeper, non-thing that's what you actually are. That non-thing is not an object and is not in the typical sense that we've just been talking about, nor is it the typical I, but it's the real I. And it is not known through thought. It does not require thought to be known because it is not an object. In a way, of course, thought is knowing it because everything is nothing but it. All the thoughts are nothing but modifications of that, in some sense, if they exist at all, which is questionable. But anyway, that all aside, the point is that the who am I question is not about just asking it mechanically. It's not about just thinking it abstractly. It's not about just contemplating this mystery. It's about hunting this facet of your everyday mundane experience, that facet, that aspect, that part of your own experience right now, which knows that I'm here, I am, and I'm not the things that I'm experiencing. I'm experiencing them, and I am not them. I am separate from them. I know I'm separate from them because I'm experiencing them. I'm experiencing them because I'm separate from them. So, and trying to turn your attention towards that, that's the meaning of the who am I. So, that is a very important thing to understand for people doing self-inquiry earnestly. And just to note, the the similarity of self-inquiry to surrender here, right? So what's happening in self-inquiry is that you are turning towards that subject aspect of experience, which is essentially, it is like, I think I said in another video, the reflective quality of experience, because it is a subject that is the prime reflecting attribute of things. The I sort of finds itself in objects. You know, it's that function, the self-conscious, it's that self-conscious thing. You know, that's why actually in Vedanta, you know, the ego is called reflected consciousness. You know, because the real consciousness is the capital S self. But when that consciousness sort of supposedly reflects on itself, it creates this sense of the egoic I. So the reason that's useful is because it's like as I also may have said elsewhere, you know, if you look at the mirror, for example, the mirror is reflecting objects, but if I tell you to focus on the surface of the mirror, right? Focus on the surface of the mirror. That's the reflecting aspect of the mirror. So even as the mirror reflects a couch, a chair, a lamp, a person, right? Whatever it's reflecting, whatever object it's reflecting, it has that sort of reflective aspect of it that's not the object, which is the surface, the reflective surface of it. You know, wherever the objects are, there the surface must also be. Similarly, right? Wherever the objects are in our experience, there the sort of reflective quality of the I must be. And I wanted to sort of connect this again to surrender, because as you hunt this sort of subject, as you hunt the reflectivity, as you hunt the I, as you chase that, as you attend to that, and that's again what the who am I question is asking, in the process, you are going to be forced to ignore the objects, to turn your attention away from the objects, because you're turning towards a subject. And so as you're hunting the subject, you progressively ignore the objects. As you hunt the subject, you encounter subtler and subtler objects, and you push them aside in favor of what is aware of them, the I that is aware of them. Similarly, in surrender, you are ignoring all thoughts or ignoring all experiences and relaxing, ignoring everything except the thought of surrender. And in that process, you are backing away from objects. And when you're backing away from objects, what are you doing? You are backing into the subject. You are backing into, in other words, the I. So self-inquiry and surrender are really the same process viewed from slightly different angles. Either way, the point is, the question, who am I, is referring you to one or the other of those processes. The processes of backing away from the changing objects of the world and going towards that facet of your felt experience, your lived experience, which is the I that stands apart from them, that knows itself as standing apart from them because it knows it's experiencing them. That is a specific contextual meaning of who am I. That's the question. That's the way we need to understand the question if we wish to succeed at self-inquiry.